Hey guys, tonight we're standing in the 14th century Sahel, sweat dripping down your back as the horizon shimmers with something you'd swear belongs in a sci-fi movie. No, not aliens. Skyscrapers, towering ochre-colored, rising like mud-baked giants from the dust. You squint at the city of Djenné, its buildings stacked 5 stories high, their facades studded with wooden beams that look like giant toothpicks holding them together. These aren't huts, they're skyscrapers, built entirely from mud. And no, you won't survive climbing them without a few chunks of clay crumbling under your hands. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. Maybe someone halfway across the world is nodding off to this right alongside you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the city gates, your sandals kicking up fine dust that clings to your sweaty ankles. The air smells like baked earth and distant wood smoke. There's no concrete here, no steel beams, just sun-dried bricks called adobe, stacked with the stubbornness of a toddler building a tower of cookies. But here's the kicker. These structures weren't just homes. They were banks, palaces, maybe even the medieval equivalent of luxury condos. The Mali Empire wasn't just rich in gold. It was rich in ambition. Historians still argue whether these towers were practical or just West Africa's version of flexing. Imagine Mansa Musa, the empire's legendary ruler, smirking as he funded mosques and mansions that scraped the sky, while Europeans were still trying to invent decent plumbing. But let's not romanticize it. Those upper floors got toasty. No AC, just cross-ventilated windows and the hope that a breeze might wander in. Still, compared to the thatched roofs of neighboring villages, this was the Ritz-Carlton of mud. You pass a group of workers slathering wet clay onto a half-built wall, their hands moving like they're petting a giant, sleepy lizard. They'll leave thumbprints in the mortar, grooves that'll help future generations climb up to patch cracks. It's a system older than your grandma's recipe book and twice as sticky. But why mud, you ask? Why not stone? Why not bamboo? Well, grab a fistful of Sahelian dirt and try making a brick. Surprise! It holds its shape. The region's soil has just the right mix of clay and silt to harden into fortress-like walls when dried. Stone would have meant hauling rocks from miles away. Mud was free, abundant, and, when done right, surprisingly sturdy. Of course, there's a catch. Rain. The monsoon season turns Djenné into a giant mud pie. But Mali's architects weren't amateurs. They tilted foundations slightly, carved drainage channels, and, get this, smeared roofs with a paste made from crocodile dung. Yes, really, historians debate whether it worked or just scared the rain away with its stench. You reach the marketplace, where traders shout over baskets of cola nuts and bolts of indigo cloth. Above you, a rooftop garden spills over with rosemary and mint. Someone's growing rosemary on a 5th-floor terrace. Medieval urban gardening, y'all. And somewhere in the distance, a termite mound looms like a tiny insect-built skyscraper. You'll get to that tomorrow. For now, lean against a cool mud wall, surprisingly refreshing, and listen to the city hum. You're still standing there, back pressed against that cool mud wall, wondering how something so fragile-looking could hold up a skyscraper. Let's break it down, shall we? Mali's architects weren't just lazy, They were smart. The soil here isn't the squishy rain puddle sludge you stepped in back home. No, this dirt's got grit. It's packed with fine clay particles that cling together like gossip at a medieval water cooler. Mix that with straw, water, and a dash of patience, and you've got adobe bricks stronger than your average IKEA furniture. Historians still argue whether the Maoli builders knew what they were doing or just got lucky. Did they test hundreds of soil blends like modern engineers? Or did they just stomp around barefoot for a few centuries, muttering, "This mud feels right"? Either way, their math checks out. Adobe's thermal mass absorbs daytime heat like a sweaty forehead, then slowly exhales it at night. That fifth-floor rooftop garden you saw earlier, it stays cool without air conditioning, just physics and a whole lot of elbow grease. But let's get back to the real genius move, those wooden beams sticking out of every wall. They're not just decorative, they're scaffolding anchors. Every few years, workers climb up those thumbprint grooves, slap fresh mud onto the facade, and, get this, butt slap the walls to smooth them out. Yes, Maoli's annual replastering festival involves grown adults waddling sideways along rooftops, smacking clay with their backsides. You'd laugh if it weren't so oddly effective. Now, imagine trying this in your backyard. "Honey, I'm building us a mud house." You dig a trench, mix clay with rice husks or ostrich eggshells because why not? And stack bricks until your neighbors ask if you're auditioning for a National Geographic documentary. But here's the kicker. Those same neighbors would probably join in. In Djenné, construction wasn't a job. It was a block party. Entire communities gathered to rebuild walls, turning maintenance into a social event. No contractors, no permits, just a potluck and a lot of sunscreen. And about that sunscreen, you remember that crocodile dung paste smeared on rooftops? It wasn't just for show. The stuff hardened into a water-resistant shell. Though modern scientists can't agree if it actually worked or if locals just got tired of arguing with tourists. One thing's certain. Walking under these towers during monsoon season meant dodging poop rain. Priorities, people. You wander over to a group of kids playing near a half-demolished wall, their fingers digging into the dried mud like it's the world's most ancient stress ball. They'll grow up knowing how to build and repair these structures by touch alone. Literacy, optional. Mud literacy, mandatory. The Maoli Empire didn't need blueprints, skills passed down through calloused hands and generations of muscle memory. Still, there's a flaw in this earthen utopia. Earthquakes, or termites, or teenagers with too much free time. A single crack could spell disaster, which is why those thumbprint grooves exist. Climbers use them to scale towers, patching holes like ants, sealing their nest. And if a building collapsed, well, the rubble just became next year's raw materials. Nothing wasted, nothing thrown away, just a never-ending loop of mud, sweat, and butt-slapping. You glance up at the termite mound again, its jagged silhouette mimicking the city's skyline. Coincidence? Maybe. But as the sun dips lower, painting the towers in honeyed light, you start to wonder. You're still staring at that termite mound, its jagged silhouette mimicking the city's skyline like a tiny insect-built skyscraper. And here's the kicker. Those bugs weren't just random neighbors. They were architectural consultants, or at least their dirt towers were. Maoli's builders studied those mounds the way modern engineers dissect skyscrapers. Except instead of blueprints, They had six-legged, mandible-wielding geniuses. Termite nests regulate temperature like a medieval HVAC system, channeling breezes through labyrinthine tunnels to keep the queen's chamber cool. No AC, no problem. Just copy the bugs. Historians still argue whether this was genius or luck. Did Mali's architects realize the termites were onto something? Or did they just build weird shapes until one survived the heat? Either way, their structures borrowed the same principles. Thick walls to absorb heat, narrow ventilation shafts to funnel breezes, and, get this, a rooftop design that mirrored the termite mound's peaked crown. You'd swear someone handed a termite a trowel and said, "You're hired." Now imagine your own mud brick home, its walls laced with the same cross-ventilation tricks. You're sprawled on a mat near a window carved into the clay, feeling a whisper of air snake through the channels. It's not chilly, but it's enough to keep sweat from pooling in places sweat shouldn't pool. Meanwhile, your neighbor's house? Slightly lopsided. Turns out he skipped the ventilation lessons and just copied the termite mound's stack a bunch of dirt upward philosophy. Now his bedroom's a sauna. And about those termites, don't get too cozy. They'll eat your furniture, your roof, your hopes and dreams. But their architectural instincts, unmatched. Some scholars even claim Mali's tallest towers leaned deliberately sideways to mimic termite resilience against wind. Others say that's stretching it. "They just built crooked," one grumpy academic muttered in a footnote. Blaming the termites is lazy. Still, you can't deny the results. These towers stood for centuries, outlasting empires and elephants alike. The Great Mosque of Djenné, rebuilt in the 1900s using the same techniques, still draws tourists who gawk at its mud brick grandeur. And somewhere in the shadows, a termite queen smirks, her dirt palace still under construction. You drag your fingers across the wall again, feeling the grooves left by generations of builders, thumbprints, scaffolding holes, and wait, is that a termite tunnel? Probably not. But you'll sleep better believing these walls have six-legged engineers watching over you. Your hands are coated in mud. Not just any mud. The sticky, fibrous kind that squelches between your fingers like overcooked oatmeal. A worker hands you a wooden paddle, its handle worn smooth by decades of calloused palms. "Stir clockwise," he mutters, tossing a handful of rice husks into the vat. You comply, muscles aching as the paddle drags through the slurry. This isn't just dirt and water. It's a recipe, a ritual, a science. Rice husks, ostrich eggshells. What even is this, a medieval smoothie? But Mali's builders weren't experimenting. They were engineering. Those husks aren't filler, they're reinforcement. Think of them as the original rebar, tiny plant fibers woven into the clay to prevent cracks. Without them, your mud bricks would crumble like stale cookies underfoot. The eggshells? They're calcium-rich, binding the mixture into something almost concrete-like. Crushed, mixed, and dried under the Sahelian sun, they turn your sludge into something stubbornly durable. Historians still argue whether this was genius or just desperation. Did someone one day toss in leftover breakfast scraps and notice the bricks held up better? Or did a shaman chant over the vat, declaring, "The spirits say ostrich bones, bless our walls"? Either way, the results speak for themselves. Those towers have outlasted your great-grandparents' houses, and they're made of literal dirt. You squat beside a stack of freshly molded bricks, their edges still damp. A kid nearby is pressing thumbprints into the sides, the grooves meant for future repairs. Remember those from Section 1? Turns out they're not just for grip. They're part of the maintenance choreography. Climbers will scale these towers every year, slapping on new mud like frosting on a lopsided cake. And if a brick cracks, you'll replace it, not with fresh clay, but with recycled rubble from last year's rebuild. Nothing wasted, nothing thrown away. Just a loop of mud, sweat, and the occasional butt slap. But back to the vat. You dip your paddle again, stirring until your arms feel like jelly. Someone nearby is crushing eggshells with a stone that sound like gravel underfoot. Another worker dumps in a bucket of ostrich feathers. Why? No one explains. Maybe they're decorative. Maybe they're a superstition. Maybe the ostriches got uppity once too often, and this is revenge. A joke ripples through the crew. Careful, someone teases. Stir too fast and you'll make beer. The group laughs. Beer. Right. You remember that mug from the ship's deck? Warm and sour on your tongue. Out here, liquid is life, whether it's in your belly or your walls. The sun climbs higher, and the mud begins to stiffen. You lift your paddle, watching thick strands stretch between the wood and the vat. Perfect. This batch will hold. It'll dry into something strong enough to stack 5 stories high. Strong enough to shelter families, shops, maybe even a rooftop garden or two. Strong enough to make you wonder why modern skyscrapers use steel when all they really needed was rice and eggshells. You glance toward the Great Mosque, its towers glowing amber in the midday light. Somewhere up there, workers are butt-slapping fresh plaster into place, their laughter echoing off the walls. You'll join them tomorrow. For now, you wipe your hands on your tunic, ruined anyway, and marvel at the science in your palms. Mud isn't just dirt, it's memory, it's math. It's the stubborn refusal to let the sun win. You're standing at the base of Djenné's Great Mosque, craning your neck until your jaw aches. This isn't just a building, it's a statement. A mud brick monolith stretching toward the sky like someone dared gravity to do its worst. Its towers look like giant termite mounds sculpted by human hands. But here's the real kicker. This mosque isn't just old, it's rebuilt every single year in a ritual so bizarre it involves butt-slapping the walls. Yes, really. The sun is rising, casting long shadows across the city as locals gather with buckets, brushes, and, most notably, wide, flat paddles. They don't just slap on new mud. They press it in, using their backsides as trowels. Picture a line of villagers waddling sideways along scaffolding, backs bent, bums pressed into wet clay, smoothing the surface with rhythmic slaps. It's part construction, part dance, part communal therapy session. Someone inevitably overbalances and tumbles into a pile of straw. No one helps them up. They just laugh and keep slapping. Historians still argue whether this annual replastering began as practical maintenance or spiritual offering. Did someone centuries ago declare, if we don't slap this wall with our butts before the rains come, the gods will flood us? Or was it just the most efficient way to pack fresh mud into cracks without fancy tools? Either way, it stuck, literally. You step closer, watching an elder smear a thick paste onto the lower wall. The mixture looks suspiciously like oatmeal gone wrong. It's a blend of clay, rice husks, ostrich eggshells, and who knows, maybe a dash of magic. He spreads it with his hands first, then grabs his paddle and starts slapping. You try not to stare when he turns around, positions himself backward and begins pressing the mud with his rear end. It works. The surface smooths out, hardened grains catching the light like tiny earthen gemstones. This ritual isn't just about keeping the mosque looking fresh. It's survival. The Sahelian rains are brutal, sheets of water that turn dirt streets into ankle-deep soup. Without regular replastering, the mosque would melt like a sugar cube in tea. So every spring, the entire town pitches in, turning what could be a miserable chore into a celebration. There's music, there's laughter, there's the occasional butt slap that goes too hard and earns a yelp. And somewhere in the crowd, a kid is already practicing his technique, smacking a patch of dry wall with exaggerated flair. He'll grow up knowing how to build and repair with nothing but his hands, and maybe a few well-placed cheeks. You glance up again. The towers gleam in the morning light, their surfaces freshly dressed in earthy brown. Another year survived, another season of worship, community, and very strange construction methods. Somewhere above you, a pigeon coasts lazily past a wooden beam jutting from the facade. Those beams aren't just decoration, they're scaffolding anchors for next year's butt slappers. You wonder if pigeons ever get mistaken for workers mid-slap. Probably not. But it's fun to imagine. You're standing on a rooftop garden, barefoot, toes curling in the warm clay tiles as a breeze snakes through the rosemary bushes. The city sprawls beneath you, mud brick towers stacked like giant sandcastles, their facades glowing amber in the late afternoon sun. But this isn't just a view, it's a status symbol. Welcome to the medieval West African version of a penthouse suite. Nobles here don't just live up high, they flaunt it. While commoners sweat in single-story homes below, the elite sip spiced tea and sip pride from their elevated perches. Rooftops aren't just for stargazing or drying laundry. They're gardens, vineyards, secret meeting spots. And if rumors are true, some even hide moonshine stills tucked behind the mint plants. You kneel beside a clay planter, brushing your fingers over thyme leaves that crumble into fragrant dust. These herbs aren't just decorative, they're practical. Rosemary keeps insects away, mint cools the air. A few pots of chili peppers ward off thieves who'd rather steal spices than face a mouthful of fire. And somewhere nearby, someone's growing lemongrass so strong it could double as perfume. Historians still argue whether these rooftop gardens were purely ornamental or part of a larger food system. Did nobles actually eat the figs hanging from those terraced vines? Or was it all about showing off? Either way, hauling soil 5 stories up a mud staircase takes effort. Effort means money. Money means power. And power in Djenné tastes like freshly picked basil. You stretch out on a woven mat, listening to the distant hum of the marketplace below. Up here, the city feels quieter, like you've escaped into a floating oasis. Pigeons coo from wooden beams jutting from the facade. A servant climbs a ladder with a bucket slung over one shoulder, muttering about another leaky gutter. Somewhere beyond the parapet, a goat bleats indignantly, probably trying to sneak a snack from the herb beds again. But not all rooftop life is serene. There's gossip, too. Servants whisper about secret meetings between merchants and politicians. Teenagers pass love notes folded into palm fronds. And yes, someone, somewhere, is brewing homemade hooch behind the lemon trees. You can smell it. Fermented mangoes, overripe dates, a splash of something stronger. A noblewoman lounges nearby, draped in indigo-dyed cotton, her gold bangles chiming as she waves a fan made of ostrich feathers. She gestures toward the horizon, where the Great Mosque's towers glow in the fading light. They say the Imam caught two boys sneaking wine up here last week, she murmurs, tumbled a whole barrel off the edge, splattered right onto the spice vendor's cart. You try not to laugh. A rain-soaked pile of fermented fruit in the street? That's not just messy. It's a hazard. Between the goats, the moonshiners, and the occasional clumsy drunk, rooftops here are more dangerous than they look. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in hues of burnt orange. The city exhales, heat retreating into the bricks. And above it all, you lie back, hands pillowed behind your head, listening to the wind rustle through the rooftop vines. Tomorrow, there will be butt-slapping rituals, termite-inspired architecture, and crocodile dung waterproofing. But tonight, you breathe in the scent of rosemary and secrets, letting the city drift you gently toward sleep. You're halfway up a half-finished tower, fingers wrapped around a wooden beam slick with sweat and dust. The ladder beneath you creaks like it's debating whether to hold your weight or send you tumbling into the arms of waiting apprentices below. Your boots press against thumbprint grooves carved into the mud, those same indentations you've seen on every building in Djenné. They look random, decorative even, but they're not. They're ladders. And right now, they're the only thing keeping you from becoming a very expensive mud brick repair project. Let's rewind. You weren't born climbing towers. You were probably some wide-eyed apprentice dragged onto a construction site by an uncle who muttered something about family tradition and handed you a trowel before you could argue. Now here you are, scaling 5 stories of drying clay like a monkey on caffeine, all because Molly's architects knew something modern skyscraper designers never considered. If your buildings are made of dirt, you'd better make them climbable. The thumbprints aren't just for grip. They're part of a centuries-old maintenance system. Every few years, workers scale these walls, slapping fresh mud onto the facade, sealing cracks before they widen into disasters. Without those grooves, they'd need scaffolding. Scaffolding means hauling wood uphill. Wood is heavy, time is money. Thumbprints, free, abundant, and slightly hilarious when someone misses a step and face plants into a patch of drying clay. Historians still argue whether this was intentional design or just a happy accident. Did early builders realize future generations would be scaling their walls like Spider-Man with dirt allergies? Or did they just press their thumbs into wet bricks out of boredom, only later realizing the grooves helped climbers decades later? Either way, the system works. Those thumbprints have lasted centuries, worn smooth by generations of calloused hands. Some even say that pressing your palm into the same indentation as a 14th century worker creates a kind of time travel handshake across the ages. Others say that's nonsense, and you're just getting dirty. But back to your climb. You inch upward, one thumbprint at a time, feeling the sun-baked mud warm beneath your fingertips. It's sturdy, surprisingly so, but you don't trust it. Not entirely. Mud isn't stone. It shifts, cracks, caves, which is why these towers lean ever so slightly, their tops tilting away from the center like they're trying to eavesdrop on the next building over. Was that intentional? A deliberate architectural shrug to prevent total collapse during storms? or just the result of too many apprentices mixing bad mortar batches. Either way, you're grateful for the thumbprints. Without them, you'd be clinging to smooth walls like a gecko in a sandstorm. As you reach the rooftop, a worker claps you on the back, nearly knocking you off balance. He tosses you a bucket of freshly mixed clay. "Time to slap," he says. "Slap what? The wall? Yourself? The poor guy who missed 3 thumbprints and is now dangling upside down from a rope?" You sigh, grab your paddle, and join the others in the annual ritual of butt slapping and brick smoothing. Another layer of history, another coat of protection, all held together by thumbprints, sweat, and the occasional yelp when someone loses their grip. You're standing beneath a dripping eave, watching as a worker smears something sticky and foul-smelling across the rooftop's edge. The paste squelches between his fingers like overcooked oatmeal. But this isn't mortar. It's crocodile dung. Yes, really. The air thickens with the scent. Earthy, musky, vaguely offensive. You wrinkle your nose. "This is supposed to keep the rain out," you mutter. The worker shrugs. "It works," he says, though his tone suggests he's not entirely convinced. Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. But here in 14th century Mali, when your entire city is built from dirt, you take what you can get. Historians still argue whether this was genius or desperation. Did Mali's builders discover that crocodile droppings hardened into a water-resistant shell? Or did they just run out of better options and start scooping up whatever lay around? Either way, the logic makes sense. Crocodile dung is rich in minerals, calcium, phosphorus, bits of half-digested fish bones that, when mixed with clay, might have formed a rudimentary sealant. Left to dry under the Sahelian sun, it could create a crust strong enough to shed monsoon rains before they seeped into the walls. Or maybe it just smelled so bad that the clouds took pity and moved on. You crouch beside a patch of dried dung, poking at it with a stick. It's hard, surprisingly so, but flakes off easily when scraped. A few inches away, the underlying mud shows signs of wear, its surface pocked with tiny craters where water has already begun to gnaw at the structure. Without regular replastering, even the best dung-sealed roofs would eventually cave in, turning rooftops into soggy sponges and bedrooms into leaky bathtubs. But there's more to this ritual than practicality. Some scholars believe the dung held symbolic meaning. Crocodiles were revered in parts of West Africa, associated with strength, resilience, and spiritual protection. Smearing their remains across the roof wasn't just about waterproofing, it was a charm, a prayer, a declaration. Our buildings may be made of dirt, but we've got ancient reptile spirits on our side. You glance toward the horizon, where storm clouds are gathering. In a few weeks, Djenné will be drenched. Streets will turn into rivers. Rooftops will groan under the weight of cascading water. And yet, despite the absurdity of using animal poop as roofing material, these towers have stood for centuries. Not because they were perfect, but because they were maintained. Every year, workers climb these walls, slapping on new layers of mud, smoothing cracks, reapplying that stinky paste like an ancient version of gutter cleaning. A gust of wind carries the scent straight into your lungs. You cough. "Is this stuff safe?" you ask the worker beside you. He grins. No one's died from it yet. That's not exactly reassuring. Still, as you lean back against the warm mud wall, listening to the distant hum of the marketplace below, you have to admit It feels solid, dry, protected, whether by science, superstition, or sheer stubbornness. The crocodile dung seems to be doing its job. For now, you're sprawled on a woven mat, the cool clay floor soaking the sweat from your back as a breeze snakes through the narrow ventilation shaft above. The room is dim, lit only by the amber glow of an oil lamp flickering against the mud brick walls. Somewhere beyond the latticed window, the city hums, distant voices, the occasional bleat of a goat, the rhythmic thud of workers slapping fresh plaster onto rooftops. But here, inside this noble's home, it's quiet. Still, this isn't just a house. It's a climate-controlled mud palace. You roll onto your side, tracing the grooves in the wall with your fingertips, thumbprints left by generations of builders, scaffolding anchors for future repairs. Above you, the ceiling stretches high, its surface studded with wooden beams that jut out like giant toothpicks. But the real magic lies in the walls. Not just their thickness, 2 feet of packed adobe, but the way they breathe. Air slips through tiny channels carved into the bricks, invisible tunnels that snake through the structure like termite tunnels. They don't look like much, but these vents are the medieval West African version of central air. No fans, no ice, just clever engineering. The shafts pull in cooler air from shaded courtyards below and funnel it upward, where it escapes through rooftop vents. The result? A home that stays comfortable. Even when the Sahelian sun beats down like a blacksmith's hammer, historians still argue whether this was intentional design or just happy coincidence. Did Mali's architects study termite mounds and mimic their cooling systems? Or did they just build weird shapes until one didn't make them pass out from heat stroke? Either way, the system works. You can feel it, the subtle current brushing your skin, the way the air doesn't hang heavy like it does outside. You stretch your legs, toes nudging against a low sleeping platform made of stacked mud bricks. No beds here, just raised platforms to keep sleepers off the damp ground. Linen curtains flutter near the windows, filtering the golden afternoon light into soft, dappled shadows. Somewhere nearby, water trickles into a clay basin, part of an underground cistern system that keeps drinking water cool without refrigeration. Genius. Simple, and slightly smelly if you forget to clean the tank. A servant passes through the doorway carrying a tray of spiced dates and warm millet porridge. He sets it down beside you, then adjusts a hanging rug near the entrance. "Too drafty?" he asks. You shake your head. The temperature feels perfect, like walking into a cave on a summer day. Outside, the wind shifts, bringing the scent of rosemary from the rooftop garden. Somewhere up there, nobles sip tea and whisper secrets beneath the stars. But down here, in this quiet chamber, you breathe in the earthy scent of dried mud and listen to the house settle around you. The walls hum softly, absorbing the day's heat, holding it close until nightfall, when they'll slowly exhale it back into the room. No need for blankets yet, just the gentle warmth of the bricks beneath your skin, the whisper of airflow through hidden channels, and the distant rhythmic slap of workers butt smoothing the roof. You close your eyes. Another layer of history, another night in a city built from dirt and ingenuity. And somewhere, deep within the walls, termites nod in approval. You're sitting cross-legged in a dimly lit workshop, surrounded by shelves stacked with clay jars, wooden tools, and what looks suspiciously like ostrich eggshells crushed into fine powder. A master builder, his hands stained with the same earth-tone grime that now coats your palms, taps a finger against his temple. This, he says, is not just building, this is mud sorcery. And honestly, he's not wrong. The architects of the Mali Empire weren't just engineers. They were guild members bound by secrets so closely guarded that many died with them. No blueprints, no written records, just memory muscle and generations of whispered instructions passed from master to apprentice like sacred spells. These builders didn't write their techniques down. They became them. Historians still argue whether this was intentional secrecy or just cultural tradition. Did they fear outsiders stealing their methods? Or did they simply trust oral transmission more than ink on parchment? Either way, the result was the same. When a master died without an heir, entire construction techniques vanished. Poof, gone. Like trying to rebuild a skyscraper using only vague hand gestures and hope. You lean forward as the builder picks up a chisel-like tool carved from river stone. He presses it into your palm, letting you feel its weight. Every family had their own blend, he murmurs. Our mortar wasn't just dirt and water. It was rice husks, termite mound dust, even powdered bones. You think we guessed? He scoffs. We remembered. You glance around the room. There are no apprentices here tonight, just you and him, and the flickering shadows cast by an oil lamp. Somewhere beyond the mud brick walls, the city sleeps. But in this workshop, knowledge is still being passed down. Did you ever wonder, you ask, if someone outside Mali figured out your tricks? The builder chuckles, low and knowing. They tried. Portuguese traders once asked too many questions. We gave them sand and told them to mix until it sang. He shrugs. They left confused. You can imagine it. Foreigners scribbling notes about mysterious African architecture while missing the real secret. It wasn't the materials. It was the ritual, the rhythm of mixing, the exact pressure needed to tamp down adobe, the way thumbprints guided future climbers. None of it made sense on paper, only through touch, through repetition, through time. A sudden gust of wind rattles the window frame, carrying with it the scent of rosemary from the rooftop garden above. The builder inhales deeply, then nods toward the door. Come, he says, let me show you how we sealed cracks before the rains came. He leads you outside, where moonlight bathes the courtyard in silver. In the center stands a half-finished wall, its surface pockmarked with thumbprints waiting for new hands to smooth them. He kneels, scooping a handful of paste from a nearby bucket. Watch, he murmurs, spreading the mixture in slow, deliberate strokes. It's not magic, not really. But as you kneel beside him, feeling the cool mud squish between your fingers, you understand why people called it that. Some knowledge isn't meant to be written. It's meant to be felt. You're standing at the base of a half-finished tower, watching as a builder leans back on his heels and squints up at the structure like he's trying to decide whether it's genius or a death trap. The wind howls through the scaffolding, rattling wooden beams like bones in a skeleton that's just remembered it's supposed to be spooky. You tug your tunic tighter around your shoulders and glance up. The tower tilts, just slightly but unmistakably, away from the center, like it's trying to eavesdrop on the building next door. Is it supposed to do that, you ask? The builder shrugs. Depends who you ask. And that's the thing about mud skyscrapers. They don't play by modern engineering rules. Steel and concrete demand rigidity. Mud flexes. It shifts with the seasons, settles with the rains, and sometimes, just sometimes, it leans deliberately sideways so that when disaster strikes, it doesn't collapse like a house of cards. Historians still argue whether this was intentional design or just the result of too many apprentices mixing bad mortar batches. Some say Mali's builders knew exactly what they were doing, that by angling their towers ever so slightly, they created a kind of early warning system. If a storm hit hard enough to knock a wall loose, the tilt would guide the collapse away from neighboring homes instead of pancaking everything into a pile of wet dirt. Others insist it was just an accident, the architectural equivalent of leaning forward while carrying too many groceries. But here's the kicker. Even if it was an accident, it worked. You press a hand against the warm clay, feeling the slight incline beneath your palm. A few inches off center might not seem like much, but over 5 stories, it adds up. And when the monsoon rains come, those brutal sky-emptying storms that turn Djenné's streets into rivers, the last thing you want is for your home to fall straight down. Better to have it tumble sideways, taking out only the goat pen instead of the entire neighborhood. A gust of wind whistles through the scaffolding, making the wooden beams creak like an old man stretching after a nap. Somewhere above you, a worker mutters something about another leaky gutter before smearing fresh mud into a crack. He doesn't seem worried about the tilt. Why would he? This isn't the first time he has climbed a crooked tower, and it won't be the last. Every year, workers slap on new layers of plaster, reinforcing weak spots, sealing gaps, ensuring that, despite its lean, the tower stands firm. Still, there are risks. Fire, for one. Wood and dried mud don't mix well with open flames, and a single spark could send the whole thing up in smoke. Floods, too, though the tilt helps there, letting water run off instead of pooling inside. But the real danger? Earthquakes. Mali isn't known for them today, but centuries ago, minor tremors must have shaken these towers like dice in a cup. And yet, somehow, some still stand. Not because they were rigid, but because they moved. Mud cracks, wood bends, and a slight lean. Sometimes it's the difference between survival and ruin. You take a step back, gazing up at the tower's crooked silhouette against the evening sky. It's not perfect, it's not symmetrical, but it's smart. And somewhere in the shadows, a termite nods in approval. You're standing in the middle of Market Street, dodging a donkey overloaded with sacks of millet and trying not to step on the toes of a weaver hawking indigo-dyed cloth from a mat spread across the dirt road. The air is thick with the scent of spices, cumin, ginger, something smoky that might be roasted shea nuts, and the steady hum of barter. But what really catches your eye isn't the goods on display, it's the walls. Yes, the walls. Because here in Djenné, a marketplace isn't just stalls and shouting traders. It's vertical. It's architectural. It's built into the buildings themselves. You press a hand against the warm mud brick facade beside you, feeling the slight give of centuries-old clay beneath your fingers. And there, carved directly into the wall, is a niche. Not just any niche, a shelf wide enough to hold a basket of cola nuts or a stack of brass bangles. Another one sits above it, then another, each one staggered like a ladder leading toward the rooftop. Some are lined with woven mats. Others hold clay jars filled with oil or honey. A few even have tiny awnings stretched over them, scraps of dyed fabric fluttering in the breeze like miniature flags. This isn't decoration. This is a vertical bazaar. Historians still argue whether this was intentional design or just merchants getting creative with limited space. Either way, the result is brilliant. No need for wooden stalls or temporary tents when the very walls of Djenné can become shop fronts. Traders rent out niches like modern-day storefronts, carving their own shelves into the mud or paying builders to do it for them. The wealthiest merchants get prime real estate, eye-level niches near the main thoroughfare, while newcomers settle for higher-up slots where buyers have to crane their necks to see what's for sale. You follow the line of shelves upward, watching as a vendor climbs a wooden ladder propped against the wall. He carries a bundle of dried okra under one arm, which he tucks carefully into his assigned niche before slapping a small sign above it, a painted gourd declaring fresh okra in bold strokes of red ochre. Below him, a customer squints up at the wares, shading her eyes with one hand. "Is that the spicy blend?" she calls. The vendor nods, tapping the jar beside the okra. "Only if you ask nicely." The street below bustles with life. Children dart between legs, goats nibble at hanging baskets, and somewhere nearby, someone is roasting sesame seeds until the scent wraps around your senses like a warm blanket. But above it all, the market continues, stacked 5 stories high, built right into the very bones of the city. A thought strikes you. What happens when it rains? Doesn't everything just melt? Not quite. Those niches aren't just cut into the wall. They're reinforced with wooden frames, slanted slightly inward to keep rainwater from pooling inside. And every year, during the Great Replastering Festival, workers climb up those thumbprint grooves, smoothing fresh mud over the facades and sealing cracks before the monsoon season begins. You glance toward the Great Mosque, its towering facade studded with the same thumbprints you've been using to climb buildings all week. Somewhere up there, a trader is probably balancing on a narrow ledge, restocking his niche with salt or dried fish, while below him a buyer shouts up, "How's the quality today?" You smile. In Djenné, commerce doesn't just happen on the ground. It rises with the city itself, stacked layer by layer into the very walls that shelter its people. And somewhere in the distance, a termite nods again. You're standing beneath a crooked tower, tilting your head back until your neck aches. The structure leans ever so slightly, just enough that if you squint, it looks like it's trying to eavesdrop on the building next door. But this isn't just another lopsided skyscraper built by an overworked apprentice with shaky hands. No, this one has purpose, or at least that's what some scholars claim. Historians still argue whether Mali's architects intentionally aligned certain towers with celestial events, or if the tilt was just the result of too many builders napping mid-project. Some say that specific buildings were angled to catch the first light of the solstice sun, their facades glowing amber in a seasonal spectacle that marked planting or harvest time. Others insist it's all coincidence, a happy accident when someone mixed too much straw into the mortar and the whole thing dried unevenly. You drag your fingers across the warm mud bricks, tracing the slight curve where the tower bends away from true vertical. A worker nearby shrugs when you ask about it. The old one said it helps with balance, he says, tapping the wall with his chisel. Like a tree leaning into the wind. Maybe, but there are those who believe otherwise. Some researchers claim these crooked towers weren't just architectural quirks, they were early sundials. The angle of the lean cast long shadows across Market Street at precise times of day, marking noon or signaling the end of work hours before anyone owned a watch. Imagine it, a city where time wasn't measured in ticking gears, but in shifting sunlight, where merchants knew to pack up their wares when the Great Mosque's shadow stretched far enough to tickle their feet. And then there are the wilder theories. One particularly enthusiastic scholar once suggested that Djenné's tilted towers were primitive seismographs designed to sway slightly during minor tremors as an early warning system for earthquakes. Another claimed they were spiritual antennas channeling energy from the stars down into the city below. And yes, someone, probably after a few too many cups of spiced millet beer, proposed that certain buildings leaned because drunk workers slapped on too much mud on festival nights and nobody wanted to fix it. You glance toward the horizon where the sun is beginning its slow descent. Shadows stretch longer now, creeping across rooftops and curling around the bases of leaning towers. If the old stories are true, soon the entire city will be bathed in golden light, its crooked spires catching the last rays like giant earthen candles. A gust of wind rattles the wooden beams jutting from the facade above you. Somewhere atop the tower, a pigeon coos lazily. You wonder if it knows how lucky it is to roost in such a prestigious location. A spot where science, superstition, and drunken construction all collided centuries ago. You take a step back, watching the way the tower leans just enough to make you second-guess gravity. Was it intentional? A blend of astronomy and architecture? Or just the result of too many apprentices mixing bad mortar batches? Either way, it stands. And that, more than anything, feels like magic. You're standing at the edge of Djenné's marketplace, watching as a caravan of traders rolls into town. Dust kicks up around their donkeys' hooves, and the scent of foreign spices clings to their robes. But something else is coming with them, something heavier than sacks of salt or bolts of silk. Change. The Mali Empire isn't eternal. It never was, and as you lean against a crumbling section of wall, fingers tracing the thumbprints left by generations of builders, you can feel it in the air, the slow unraveling of an era. Historians still argue over exactly what brought the empire to its knees. Was it internal strife, rival kingdoms gnawing at its borders, or maybe just time itself, that relentless thief of empires and mud brick towers alike? Either way, the decline is already underway. The gold trade is shifting, caravans are rerouting, foreign powers are sniffing around like wolves circling a wounded beast, and then come the invaders. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon enough. You've heard rumors, whispers of Portuguese ships nosing along the coast, of Berber raiders slipping through desert passes, of European explorers scribbling notes about primitive African architecture while missing the genius beneath their boots. They'll arrive with maps, muskets, and a deep, unshakable belief that stone is superior to mud. You glance toward the Great Mosque, its towers glowing amber in the late afternoon sun. These buildings have stood for centuries, outlasting kings, droughts, and the occasional drunken apprentice who slapped too much mortar onto a rooftop. But they won't last forever. A gust of wind carries the scent of rain from the horizon. Monsoon season is coming, and when it does, parts of the city will flood. Some walls will crack. Others will collapse entirely. Repairs will be slower now. Fewer workers climbing those thumbprint grooves, fewer hands slapping fresh mud onto rooftops. Maintenance isn't just labor, it's tradition. And traditions fade when people stop believing in them. You wander through the market, past niches carved into walls where traders once hawked brass bangles and dried okra. Some shelves sit empty now, others sag under the weight of neglect. A vendor shrugs when you ask why he hasn't repaired his niche. Too many taxes, he mutters, too few customers. Empires don't fall all at once. They erode, slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone. And then comes the final blow. It's not a war, not a siege, just a shift in power, a new ruler, a different capital, a decision made hundreds of miles away that spells the end for Djenné. Trade routes dry up, builders move on. The replastering festivals grow smaller each year until no one bothers to climb the towers anymore. You run your hand along a wooden beam jutting from the facade above. Once, these beams anchored scaffolds, held ladders, supported entire generations of climbers. Now, they're just relics. Somewhere in the distance, a pigeon coos lazily. The city still stands. For now. But even the tallest towers must bow eventually. You're standing at the edge of Djenné's ruins, the wind whispering through cracks in walls that once towered toward the sky. The Great Mosque still stands, though its towers lean like tired giants, their once pristine surfaces now rough with age and neglect. Thumbprints linger in the clay, worn smooth by generations of hands. Some steady, some shaken, all of them gone now. The city hums faintly beneath your feet, not with the bustle of traders or the laughter of apprentices scaling ladders, but with memory, with stories pressed into every brick, every slanted beam, every rooftop garden long since overtaken by weeds. You press a hand against the cool mud, feeling the weight of centuries settle around you like a heavy cloak. Historians still argue whether Mali's architects knew what they were building wouldn't last forever. Did they believe their towers would stand for eternity, or did they accept that time would eventually reclaim even the tallest skyscrapers? Either way, they built them anyway, not just as homes or temples, but as declarations. We were here. We built something beautiful from dirt and sweat and stubbornness. A gust of wind rattles a wooden beam overhead, sending a puff of dust swirling into the air. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleats, then falls silent. The sun is sinking low, casting long shadows across the cracked streets, turning the ruins into silhouettes of their former selves. And yet, there's peace here, a quiet dignity. You wander toward the marketplace, where niches carved into walls still hold traces of past lives, scraps of fabric caught in crevices, rusted hooks where signs once hung, faded paint marking old prices. Some shelves are collapsed now, others leaning at odd angles, mirroring the crooked towers above. It's not decay exactly, it's transformation. The city isn't gone, it just changed shape. A pigeon coos from a high ledge, wings flapping softly as it takes off, vanishing into the amber sky. You watch it go, then turn back toward the mosque. Its towering facade still holds the scars of time, but it stands, still tilted slightly, still leaning into the wind like it knows something you don't. Maybe it does. You take one last look around. No replastering festivals today. No butt-slapping workers smoothing fresh mud onto rooftops. Just the slow rhythm of nature reclaiming what was always borrowed. And yet, somewhere below your feet, termites still tunnel through forgotten foundations, rebuilding in silence. Somewhere above, birds still nest in jutting beams. Somewhere far away, a child presses their palm into wet clay, unknowingly echoing the thumbprints left behind centuries ago. Time moves forward, but history never truly sleeps.